Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to another episode of the Bible Explained. This is the series where I go through and I interpret a lot of the Bible verses and just talk about some of the meanings, the words, and go deeper than what you would get in a typical Sunday school lesson. As I have my master's degree, I want to share my knowledge with you, and I think that it's important to impart the knowledge. I want to stay humble, and I want to come to you just as somebody who was just like you before I got my degree, and tried to sort through a lot of these verses and figure out what they mean. So if you were stumbling through life and wondering what it all meant and if Christianity was just a farce or not, you don't have to go to college. I will sort through the Bible and the verses, and maybe later on we'll talk about some biblical history as well once this series is done. But it'll be a long series, so let's jump right into it. And we're going to begin with going into chapter 3 of Genesis. This is going to be the NIV version, the New International Version of the Bible. If you want to follow along, you can just type in Genesis chapter 3 into Google. It'll come right up, but you can use any Bible. You can use pretty much any Bible. If you personally have a different Bible that you would like to use, like King James or New King James Version or other versions as well, there's going to be some minute differences in the wording and things like that, but the core point will still be received, and that's why we're doing this. So, I want to begin with the chapter head being the fall. Now, this is a story that's very well known for everyone. Everyone knows that Adam and Eve fell to sin. Why did they fall? Because they ate the apple, right? That's what it's portrayed as in most secular medias. Even a lot of Christianity propaganda is we have a naked guy and a naked woman listening to a snake wrapped around an apple tree and eating the apple when God said not to. So that's the gist of it, right? We can take the whole chapter and just condense it right down into that, right? But there's more to it, so let's find out. Now, chapter 3, verse 1 states, "Now the serpent was more crafty than any other of the wild animals the Lord had made. He said to the woman, 'Did God really say you must not eat from any tree in the garden?'" So, I want you to notice that whenever they have somebody speaking that's important, they'll put quotations around them. This is massively important so that you get the context of who is saying what. We haven't really had a lot of speaking. I mean, there's been a few lines, but we are just in chapter 3. This is the first verse of it, so of course there's not been much speech. But let's talk about this verse. We want to start off with serpent. It was never described as a snake. A lot of people relate serpents to snakes because a serpent looks like a snake. When a snake tries to move forward, he has to serpentine back and forth. So that's what it would be described as, a serpent. You know, back in the day, way back in the day, we're talking about like, maybe 5,000, maybe even 10,000 years before Jesus Christ's death, 10,000 BC, what would people call that creature? They would call it a serpent. You know, there could be multiple different varieties of snakes, but you would still just refer to it as serpent because that's a general acknowledgement there. You know what I mean? So that's where I think serpent comes from. It is noted that the serpent is more crafty than any of the other wild animals. I find it very odd because there's not any talks in the Bible of animals speaking to people. I mean, there are very limited things like that, but in different situations. In this situation, it's like the snake just rolled up and started talking to Adam and Eve, and later on in the Bible, it's not like, a tiger just starts talking to like David, and he's like, "Hey, yo, David, what's up with you? How you doing?" You know what I mean? Nothing like that. But in this scenario, it's pitched that way, like the snake is just having a chat. And it could be taken that Adam and Eve are in perfection. They are in the Garden of Eden, so they can understand what the animals say. And what the rest of the animals say isn't important, so it's not documented. And it was not necessary for the completion of the Bible. Just the fact that the serpent was crafty and he is attempting to deceive them. So, it is also noted that the Lord God had made it is craftier than any of them. So it again acknowledges that God created all of those animals. And he spoke to the woman, not the man. Please note that he selected who he spoke with. He had all the time in the world. Time is not a concept at this point. And he chose to speak to the woman and not the man. The man may have been much more resilient to what the serpent was saying because he was around God longer, right? So who knows? And he starts with a question, a proposition. Did God really say that? Not, I don't think God really told you not to eat any fruit. You could probably eat this fruit. It'll be okay. He said, did God really say that? Questioning what God actually said. You must not eat of any tree in the garden. And that is untrue. We know that's factually untrue because God said you can eat of any tree in the garden except for one. So let's go to verse 2. Just note how deceitful and cunning the serpent was. Verse 2, the woman said to the serpent, we may eat fruit from the trees in the garden, but God did say, you must not eat fruit from the tree that is in the middle of the garden. You must not touch it, or you will die. Now, this is just a recap of exactly what God had said in the previous chapter, and he exactly said that. So we don't need to delve into this, but I do want to note one thing is emphasized and pointed out that also it stated you must not touch it. I don't think they actually would have died if they touched that fruit. I mean, consumption is probably the biggest no-no. God said not to eat it, not to go anywhere near it, really. Honestly, that would have been a better statement, but to not touch it or you will die. The words used here is a metaphor. Understanding death, most people, if I tell you, hey, don't touch that power line, if you touch that power line, you will die. Most people would say, okay, I understand that. If I touch that power line, I'll die. They wouldn't say, I'm going to go touch the power line, see if I die. If I don't die, well. Most people's understanding is if somebody says you will die, it's immediate. And that's going to play a big part in the next few verses. In this instance, it's not immediate death, but the death of the flesh. So we're going to move on to verse 4, and the serpent is replying here. You will certainly not die. The serpent said to the woman, for God knows that when you eat from it, your eyes will be opened, and you will be like God, knowing good and evil. The serpent did not lie here. You will not die immediately. So from a certain point of view here, the serpent is telling the truth. If they ate from the fruit, they wouldn't die, and they would know of good and evil. And that is the problem, because he isn't lying, but what he is inducing and proposing is going to be the death of the flesh eventually, and separation from God through sin, because it is a complete and total disobedience of God's command. So we're going to go ahead and continue forward. Verse 6, when the woman saw that the fruit of the tree was good for food and pleasing to the eye and also desirable for gaining wisdom, she took some and ate it. She also gave some to her husband who was with her, and he ate it. Then the eyes of both of them were open, and they realized they were naked, so they sewed fig leaves together and made coverings for themselves. So we have the first understanding of what good and evil is. We're going to discuss that, but let's back it up to verse 6. So the woman went over to the tree. The serpent said, go ahead and eat it. So she did. She saw that it was pleasing to the eye and desirable for gaining wisdom. And so she took some and ate some. And it's interesting that this fruit is what would give them the knowledge of the good and evil, because if they're perfect, they probably already had that knowledge. It was just hidden from them to keep them perfect. But if they had asked the question, they would have gotten an answer. Please note also that she gave some to her husband. It wasn't her husband who ate first, which will grant them some mercy. It will grant Adam quite a bit more mercy than Eve. And unfortunately, the serpent will get the worst of it. But she gave it to her husband. But her husband was with her, So it's not necessarily explaining where they were or location. She could have just went over to the tree, grabbed it, and walked back to her husband, who she was with at the time. And it could also indicate that she told her husband to go over this tree. The serpent told us to eat this. It's pretty good. Look at it. Let's have a bite, something like that. And he could have been with her right there and then anyways. But it is notable that it does say that it's desirable for gaining wisdom. So she was tricked very easily. A talking snake just told her to eat it, and she did. Then the eyes of both of them were opened as they realized they were naked. So it's kind of a metaphorical saying again, if you're blind, you don't know what's going on, and you have your eyes open, then you learn the truth. And so there you have it. Their eyes were open. They realized they were naked. So what they did was they took a fig tree's leaves and made coverings for themselves. That's where you get the whole leaf on the crotch from a naked person. That's a massive meme through history. It's strange though, because there's no reason that they should have done this, and this is a big tell and a giveaway to God in the future that they have done something, because they wouldn't know that they were naked. Why would they know they were naked? What is naked? They wouldn't know that, because they wouldn't have the desire to ask the question to know it. So you start to see the whole picture here. You start to see and understand that they really shouldn't be making coverings for themselves, because they were like the animals, just better. But they still didn't know of good and evil. I suppose it could be correlated that being naked would be evil if you knew about it. I don't know. That's a little too deep for me. My understanding is pretty simple, that this is just a vessel to progress the story, and that by sewing figs together, it's a tell for God. We're going to move on to verse 8. Then the man and his wife heard the sound of the Lord God as he was walking in the garden in the cool of the day, and they hid from the Lord God among the trees of the garden. But the Lord called to the man, "Where are you?" So, some big things here, some telling things here. If God is omniscient, if God is omnipotent, then he would have already known the answer. So why would he be doing this? Well, there's a couple reasons. Perhaps he wanted to see how they would react. He gave them free will, after all. We've already discussed the parallels of free will and robots, and what's the point in having free will if you're a robot, and what's the point in having love if a robot loves you? We've already discussed that, so perhaps this was all part of the reaction. Perhaps things could have gone very, very differently if Adam and Eve stood their ground and said, we did nothing wrong, things like that. But we're going to get into that later. I also want to note that the man and his wife heard the sound of the Lord God as he was walking. So God could have been giant, God could have been small, God could have just been walking through leaves, grass, making some noise or something. I don't know. It says he was walking through among the trees in the garden, things like that, So is he giant? Some people say he was giant. Some people say he was small. It's never described. It's never explained. But the Lord God called the man, saying, "Where are you?" Again, the biggest point here, if God's omniscient, omnipotent, knows everything, then why would he call? So, verse 10, he answered, "I heard you in the garden, and I was afraid, because I was naked, so I hid." And that's not exactly the answer you want to give to God. Why would you be afraid of your Maker if you didn't know any better? What would cause you to fear if nothing has occurred to create the fear and instill the fear? And why would you be afraid because you were naked? Why would you hide? All of these are very good questions. And it explains that they're not hiding what they've done from God necessarily, but they're upfront with why they are doing what they're doing. So we're going to move on to verse 11. And he said, "Who told you that you were naked? Have you eaten from the tree that I commanded you not to eat from?" At this point in time, they could have easily replied saying that the serpent told us we were naked, and they still would have a little bit of leverage in lying and being deceitful to God. Of course, the Lord would have already known that it was a lie, but they could have said that, but they didn't. But something unique here is that God asks, who told you you were naked, and then immediately moves to, did you eat the fruit I told you not to eat? So there's that. Verse 12, the man said, the woman you put here with me, she gave me some fruit from the tree, and I ate it. So the man throwing the woman under the bus, some people would say, but he is just telling the truth. She gave him some fruit, and he ate it. Verse 13, then the Lord God said to the woman, what is this you have done? And the woman said, the serpent deceived me, and I ate. And so again, we have a lot of blame shifting here. In verse 12, the man tells the truth, but he's trying to shift the blame on the woman. In verse 13, the woman answers and says that the serpent deceived me, but she is truthful about what she does also, but tries to push it on the serpent, acting as if she didn't have free will, acting as if she should not have been able to control herself. And oh man, I just ate the fruit. I don't know what happened. So we're going to move on to verse 14. So the Lord said to the serpent, because you have done this, cursed are you above all livestock and all wild animals. You will crawl on your belly, and you will eat dust all the days of your life. And I will put enmity between you and the woman, and between your offspring and hers. He will crush your head, and you will strike his heel. This is verse 14 and 15. This is the curse. These are the things that are being done, unfortunately, because of what has occurred in the garden. Adam and Eve, and the repercussions of eating, they started to hide from God. They started to hide their nudity. This is unraveling perfection. They didn't need to do any of this. They didn't need to know about good and evil. They could have enjoyed perfection and bliss without it. And here is the reaction of what happens from their sin, what they did when they didn't listen to God. They were cursed. The serpent first, he will now become a snake, and he is traditionally viewed as the snakes that we know of today. Is it the same exact snake? I don't know. Were there other serpents before the flood? I don't know. Were there serpents before the meteor struck the earth and wiped out the dinosaurs? I don't know. The point is, this is the curse, and it seems to line up with the snakes that we still have around today. We're going to move into verse 16. To the woman he said, I will make your pains in childbearing very severe. With painful labor you will give birth to children. Your desire will be for your husband, and he will rule over you. And so we have verse 16 to kind of set the stage for a lot of sexism that has happened in the world. And a lot of people justify sexism because of this, but again, that would be throwing away man's free will to have said no to eating the fruit. The woman's curse is that when she bears children, it will hurt. Before, she could have had kids without it being painful, and she could have done her own thing. She didn't have to desire her husband. She didn't have to desire a man, but here, that is what it is, and she will be ruled by man, essentially. And then we move on to verse 17. To Adam he said, because you listened to your wife and you ate the fruit of the tree about which I commanded you, you must not eat from it. Cursed is the ground because of you. Through painful toil you will eat food from it all the days of your life. It will produce thorns and thistles for you, and you will eat the plants of the field. By the sweat of your brow you will eat your food until you return to the ground, since whence from it you were taken. For dust you are, and dust you will return. And now, this is something that is very, very strange. A lot of people think that this is like a curse for man, that man would have to toil in the fields, Because earlier in the garden, God said, you can eat from any tree you want. You don't have to work the earth. You don't have to plant seeds. You don't have to toil. You don't have to de-weed anything. It's perfect here. Just go ahead and grab some fruit. It'll grow for you, and you can eat anything you want except from this one tree. And so, a lot of people think that applies to everybody, all the generations. We have farmers, and they farm the fields, and that's how they have to eat now. But there's also the theory out there that all of this only applies to Adam and Eve in the sense that they were alive, so that their generations might inherit the same curse. But for this generation, that's where the curse ends, especially for Adam, because once he becomes dust, he will return to dust, and then the curse would be complete because he would be dead. But that's not true, mainly for the simple fact that we still have farmers around, and that's how we eat, even to today. So verse 20, Adam named his wife Eve because she would become the mother of all the living. Now, at this point in time, again, it should be noted that it appears that there is only Adam and Eve in the Garden of Eden. There may be other people, but as for what we know, we're assuming that these are the only two humans on the planet, and they just got screwed over by a serpent. They ate the food of knowledge of good and evil, and now they know of that knowledge, and they know when they're going to sin. They know when they are doing evil, and now they have to leave paradise, essentially, because that's what's going to be happening in the next verse. Verse 21, and the Lord God made garments of skin for Adam and his wife, and clothed them. That's very polite. The good Lord could have killed them, could have destroyed them. Instead, he cursed them, and he permitted them to continue life, knowing what they knew. And he even gave them garments of skin. I'm not particularly sure what the garments of skin would be. Maybe he skinned a cow and gave them the cow skin. It's not very specific here. It's a good question on what exactly the garments are. Verse 22, and the Lord God said, the man has now become like one of us, knowing good and evil. He must not be allowed to reach his hand and also take from the tree of life and eat and live forever. Now, why is this? Why can man not be immortal and also know of good and evil? That's a good question. It's not answered here. It is just noted that the Lord God did not want that to happen. Also, from this perspective, from this point of view, the Lord God is speaking with other people. He is saying, man has now become like one of us. Who is us at this point in time? A lot of people say angels. A lot of people say Jesus. A lot of people say, it could be God and the other gods that God was with at the time when he was creating everything. But it is not specified. Just note that God is speaking to more than one person. There are more than just one person. There are more than just Adam and Eve. He wouldn't refer to Adam and Eve as us because Adam and Eve are not on the same level as God, and therefore they would not be referred to as us. God is speaking to somebody else about Adam and Eve. Why man can't be immortal and know of the knowledge of good and evil is a good question. It's alluded to that sin would just corrupt man if man lived forever, and eventually all man would just turn to evil. That is what's alluded to later in the Bible, but for now, there's no answer. Verse 23, so the Lord God banished him from the Garden of Eden to work the ground from which he had been taken. It's pretty simple. He got kicked out of the garden, and he was told, work the ground. You're the dust. Go on and work it. You can create life too. Verse 24, after he drove the man out, he placed on the east side of the Garden of Eden cherubim and a flaming sword flashing back and forth to guard the way to the tree of life. God was serious about this. God did not want man to be corrupted for all of his days. God really wanted it to end and have the curse end, and he wanted to fix things with Adam and Eve, his creatures. and he put a cherubim, which, I could be saying that wrong, but it's just basically an angel, a very lower tiered angel, one that looks very similar to humanity, with a fire sword. This is the first mention of weapons in the Bible, and it's an angel guarding a location so that man can't just come up and grab the fruit of the tree of life and live forever. Interesting. That is a very unique way of guarding the tree of life from a God who is omniscient and omnipotent. Could he not have just snapped his fingers and reversed everything if man did go and eat of the fruit? Perhaps he couldn't have. Putting a God there implies that there had to have been a reason. There had to have been a risk. And so that ends this Bible study. I hope you guys enjoyed it. If you did, I always appreciate you liking and sharing the work. Just remember that if you have any questions, you can leave them in the comments down below. Please discuss. What do you think? Do you think God was omniscient, omnipotent? Do you think God knew this was going to happen? Do you think the serpent is actually Satan? And what about the angel guarding? Who is us? Why would God be talking to someone? A lot of questions with very few answers. And so in the next one, hopefully I'll be able to answer some more. And hopefully you'll come back for those answers.